How do I need to think about expected value? How do I need to think about finding edge? How do I need to think about the learning process and how to improve as efficient and effectively as possible? So what's been so cool is there's so many traders that trade stuff that I have zero interest in, or I'm just not aware of, or I'm not watching, and they've incorporated it into their own strategies. That's the type of thing where so many people scalp out their size so quick and then they end up with nothing and it just keeps going. Every drawdown I would get in, I would be so frustrated, it would be so heartbreaking. But then after enough years, I was like, Lance, you've been through this. One of my top heuristics that I talk about in the course is your best trades immediately go in your favor. As traders, it's an amazing job. It can give us so much, but you don't want that to come at the cost of happiness.
Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Trade Takes with me, Sam, presented to you by Investors on the Ground. Now, you'll notice I'm in a different setting, and that's because I'm in Miami, and I haven't come all this way not to record with a good friend of mine and a good friend of both IU's and all of yours as well. Some know him as a people's champion. Some know him as the legend. Some know him as the one Lance B. Lance, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Good to have you out here. We've had a lot of fun times. We've had some good meals, and I've kept you well fed, and it's been going great.
I can confirm, very well fed. I feel a little sun-kissed. It's very different to what I'm used to right now, where I'm wearing 3 layers, a coat, a hat, and as you can see, shorts and t-shirts.
It's the perfect essential work trip.
It is, yeah. But it's like 90% food, 10% work, which is really nice.
That's how it always is.
I can say that's a great ratio. That is your way, yeah. So welcome to the show. It's great. Thank you for having me out here. It's a real honor. Now, firstly, I want to congratulate you on Magnum Opus. I've already started watching it. It's an absolute brilliant course that you've just launched.
A masterpiece.
A masterpiece, yeah. I must admit, though, I did have to look up what Magnum Opus meant. My Latin perhaps isn't as great as it should have been. So, yeah.
That's okay. As we go back in the languages, we've got American English, the proper, true, modern language. Then we go back a little in time, we get
exactly.
British English. Then a couple years prior, you get Latin.
Just a couple of years prior, yeah, exactly. Now, you've been a mentor for many years. Trillium, your special advisor, SMB Capital. And I think now this is going to expose you to an even new audience where you're mentoring, obviously, typically the retail trader, perhaps, who signed up for your course. And I think those watching now, that's what I really want you guys to stick around, because that's what we're going to dive deep into today. And I think mentorship is one of those topics that's just so commonly spoken about. But you as a mentor, I think just to set the scene, why is mentorship so important?
Well, so I think especially having started on the prop side of Trillium, I don't think I would have necessarily even made it and had this career had I not had true proper mentorship. And mentorship allows you to accelerate the learning curve. Mentorship provides you with a more resilient support network. And so it's not just about learning strategies, learning concepts, even just how to go about getting better at the job. And I remember for me, when I was struggling my first couple years, mentorship even comes in the form of, I asked the number 2 person in our group, and I was just honest with him. I'm like, look, I don't know if I'm gonna make it at this job, and I've started to interview elsewhere. And he provided me the guidance to say, hey Lance, I can see you're improving. I can see you understand these concepts. And I think if you don't give it another 6 months, you're probably gonna really end up regretting it one day. And boy, did that, boy, was that prescient advice, because had I left, there would be no Lance B at all. And, well, that sounds a little dark.
I was going to say, not quite. You still be around.
The modern presence of the one Lance B in current form.
Yeah, quite.
And so mentorship is essential. And so a lot of what I've done, obviously everybody knows my trading, but even at Trillium, when I was running the Chicago office, I was mentoring traders and incoming classes, and I was hiring. Now, even at SMB, I'm mentoring and advising some of their traders. And what's so cool with Magnum Opus is that was my attempt to say, how can I do all of this at just infinite scale?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's obviously the past couple of years, you're still obviously in touch with the prop world, but you've probably exposed yourself to more of the likes of people like me, trading at home independently. And I suppose what are some of the pitfalls that you think the likes of the average retail trader or independent trader falls into particularly in the early stages, perhaps those initial couple of years?
Yeah, I think immediately there's three pitfalls, and there's more, but these immediately just smack me in the face as the most common, biggest issues that I need to always constantly iron out. The first is unrealistic expectations of the learning curve. So what people need to understand is even at Trillium, with the firm's capital, resources, direct mentorship every single day, and you're in an environment just surrounded by traders with edge, nevertheless, they still relay the message that it is a 2-year learning curve. So you're taking the absolute most top candidates, which, truth be told, will not always be the masses from FinTwit. It's just a numbers game, right?
Yeah.
There's only so many really standout candidates. So you're taking the best candidates, you're giving them mentorship, they're working probably 50, 60 plus hours a week, and it's still a 2-year learning curve. So for the average retail trader that might be pursuing this part-time, that might be pursuing this with less than ideal mentorship, that might be pursuing this with less than ideal background and knowledge of markets and everything else, that learning curve can go way, way longer. So much is reframing their expectations and having them know it's not normal and you're not supposed to be making money very early on. So that's one. The second thing I would say is a lot of beginner traders, they think trading is a lot about ideas and having a thesis and this tangible thing. Oh yeah, like I had this idea that I thought this could. That's not what trading is. Like there's no edge in that, at least not for the type of trading we tend to do. Where true edge lies is, yeah, maybe you can have an idea or a slight bias, but that combined with very, very specific setups on the chart. These variables that people need to analyze are the intraday chart, the daily chart, what does the volume look like, is there a news catalyst? And only when you combine all of those things together, then can you have the chance of having edge. And so, like, even take Nate, for example, right? Nate has a lot of trade ideas. But what Nate is doing is Nate is combining those trade ideas with chart setups, and he's using analogies, right? How often does Nate say, okay, this chart is synonymous with this pattern, I can see this unfolding that way. And so he's connecting all the dots in his mental database of charts. He's not just blindly covering up the chart and trading the idea. It's idea with setup that you have pattern recognition for, that you have backtested, that you have data on, that you have edge in, combined. That equals opportunity. That doesn't mean any opportunity is going to work at an individual basis, but in the aggregate over time.
Yeah.
So those two areas, the unreal expectations about the learning curve, the thought that, I'm going to just trade my ideas and that's going to work. Then the other thing, of course, is with a lot of the trading, you still then need to apply size and grow in a very intentional, meaningful manner, right? And so I think a lot of people have difficulties divorcing themselves from the outcome and the P&L and the money, especially because on the retail side, it's your money. There is no firm capital, it's yours. And so what happens is people can't divorce themselves from the P&L and the money, and they, from the very outset, they start obsessing over the outcome rather than the process. And so the other major thing I do with people is get them to focus on how can I get better each day? What are the steps I need to take to improve? And how can I grow my size, grow my account, and improve at a gradual rate so that I don't get injured, right?
Yeah.
Take a weightlifting analogy. The way to grow is through progressive overload. You're pushing yourself, you're a little bit uncomfy, every day is kind of a difficult workout, but you're not doing anything that's gonna injure yourself. Because if you get injured, that's gonna be a multi-month, 6-month, even a year setback. So many traders, they're trying to grow too fast. And much like at the gym, they take some huge drawdown of their account, and then they're injured, and it slows their long-term growth. And especially most traders are young males, and they don't want to hear the slow and steady path. They want to see big numbers quick. And much like those people at the gym, they're going to get injured. And over the weekend, right, we were at the launch party, and we got to speak with so many retail traders and hear their stories. And how many times did those 3 issues come up?
Yeah, I mean, every time, pretty much.
True.
I just want to roll back onto, so point one, for example, like to manage expectations. You've touched on even within, an elite environment, it can take 2 years. So in terms of like managing those expectations for someone, because, perhaps from day dot, who's just started, for the average like part-time trader then, do you think it's fair to say that they can expect it could be, 3-4 years before they actually start turning a really decent income? Obviously, I know there's going to be like outliers within that, and people are going to be able to do it within, some people might be able to do it from day dot. But for the average person, what would you expect?
Here's also what's so toxic about social media, and whether that's in personal world or trading world, you're only seeing the highlight reel, right?
Yeah.
So the accounts that are getting magnified and amplified on social media, those are the traders of, ooh, I've been trading 1 year and now I'm making 500 grand. What you're not seeing is the more important part. There's probably 400 plus traders for every one guy that like crushes it in 1 year that either haven't succeeded or on a way slower pace. Yeah. And so I think it's totally reasonable for a part-time trader or someone, or even just a not part-time trader, for this to be a 3-4 year plus learning curve. And so for them, what I'd much rather do is divorce them from the whole thought of learning curve at all and like timeline, and just say, look, your sole job is to get a little bit better each day.
Yeah.
As long as you focus on the process and improve, the rest will take care of itself. And so many people, they have these unrealistic expectations, and we're comparing ourselves. It's like, it's just like, oh wait, my life is supposed to be vacations and Instagram models and all this silly stuff. You compare to the highlights when it's like, wait, no, like that didn't used to exist, all these silly benchmarks. So you don't need to compare yourself on social. You need to compare yourself to yourself the prior day. And as long as you're that little bit better, like look, you can go online and you can find a video of some 150-pound person bench pressing 400 pounds. Mm-hmm. Good for him. I'll probably never be able to do that, but it's also irrelevant. Like, okay, that guy exists. 50 years ago, I would have never known about him. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have never known about him. Now he gets amplified on social media, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm a shitty lifter. Or like, oh, why am I not progressing that fast? When it's irrelevant. There's always going to be those outliers. But for me, all I can do to get stronger at the gym is control what I can control. I can control my diet, I can control my sleep, my workout, and getting better and working at it each day. Yeah, and that's absolutely what traders out there need to do, and divorce themselves from even remotely caring about anyone else's scorecard.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously, you touched on control there. And I think one of the things that, like, watching through Magnum Opus, that I always think, and like, I've had, the privilege of being a semi-professional rugby player and, had the chance to be a professional rugby player. I always think actually the gap is not as big as you think, in that actually it's all about those little controllable habits that you can do on a day-to-day basis. And you've touched on like your morning routine, for example. You've touched on how important it is, but it's not like some Herculean effort where you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning having a ridiculous, a cold shower. I mean, I love cold showers for the record, but it's actually, they're quite simple and standard things that anyone could implement, starting from now.
Yeah, and if I were to take a guess, because this is true for any performance activity or sport or anything, the difference between the really elite rugby players, I would assume they were doing the most effective essential practices effectively and consistently for the longest period of time. And they're people that just got better. And when most people were taking days off, when most people were taking their foot off the gas, they were letting up. Others were letting up while they just kept pushing. And that margin, you're right, it's not that big, but over time it all adds up, and the performance difference ends up meaningful.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're absolutely right there. And I think like you're right that what they do on a daily basis isn't so different to what the average person probably would do 2 or 3 days a week, but they're doing it 5, 6, 7 days a week. And then over the course of, you add that up over 3, 4, 5 years, that's just they're just poles apart at that point.
Yep. And the thing I think I want to stress more going forward that I probably haven't done so great of a job at is not everybody needs to be the Lance of trading. You don't need to be some sacrifice everything, go all in, go as hard as you can to just like, I must become the best out there. It's a great attitude to have if that's your why and that's what you want. But I think most people out there, most people are just trying to make a really good living while having the flexibility of the work style and doing a job they love. And so for them, it's like, yeah, you don't need to just like squeeze every drop out of the lemon. But what you do need to do is make sure you're very, very effective, intentional, and conscious with your use of time each day. And especially if you're someone that's trying to learn part-time, or especially if you have some other factors against you, the most important thing you can do is just say, look, these are the boundaries that I can work with. Like, okay, maybe I got to be done with work and trading by noon, or maybe I can only review for 1 hour in the evening because you've got a couple kids or something. Who knows? And it's so important for those people to just make sure whatever time they can allot to improvement and the craft, they make sure it's effective, intentional, and sustained over the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that Nate talks about a lot as well, is particularly when we're talking about comparisons, which we have touched on, is it very difficult for a young woman who's got 3 kids to compare herself to someone who's able to trade full time. That's not a comparison that someone should make either.
Yeah. And what's so hard is with most things on the internet, and even just most comparisons in real life, you don't know the full behind the scenes story, right? So you could be someone where you're a parent, or you've got other priorities, you've got part-time jobs, or maybe you have a less capital base, like less ability to learn or fund an account and everything and get the reps in. And you might be comparing yourself to someone that's 22 years old and is able to put 80 hours in and has really good mentorship. And maybe they've spent $100,000 on mentorship or something. Maybe they were able to find an incredible trading pod and really got some advice and tips that put them on a good path. Like that's great for them, but it doesn't change anything for you. Yeah. And so I think in today's world, it's easier than ever to compare yourself to these just irrelevant and irrational things, but that ultimately harm our ability to stay motivated and sustain the work that does matter.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of routine, what do you think is one of your non-negotiables that you, obviously when you were at your peak at Trillium, that you would undergo every single day that you think people overlook, the average person will overlook on a day-to-day basis?
Yep, so this is a good question. And so this came up Saturday at the launch party, talking with some traders. And I've tried to highlight this point in a few areas, but a lot of times with advice, you don't know the context of who it applies most to, who it applies least to. And so what I was doing at the peak of my career might not necessarily be relevant for other people, right? Mm-hmm. So let's take 2 traders. One trader has no edge and is at the very beginning of their career, and they don't have any strategy or anything like that. So then if you take an elite trader, the elite trader might really be working on sizing and pushing their size. The elite trader might really be working on their psychology. The elite trader might really be refining their process to put in actually less time so they can have more work-life balance. Now compare that to the trader with no edge and no strategy. If you increase your sizing, that's harmful and dangerous and going to hurt you. If you focus on psychology, that is misdirecting you from your real problem, which is that you don't have edge. And then if you start to pare back the hours to be more efficient, that's not really what you need at the early stage of the career. Yeah. So a lot of times it's like you can conflate different pieces of advice. And so what I did at the peak of my career was really focus on sizing, really focus on psychology, really focus on my risk management, and not a lot of strategy development because I already had my strategies. I already knew what those A+ moments look like. And that being said, if you're brand new and you don't have those strategies, what you want to be doing is you want to be reverse engineering the biggest moves in the market. Mm-hmm. You want to be studying chart patterns and building all these databases. So what someone at the beginning does is probably nearly exactly opposite to what someone at the elite level does. And that's why I try to be really careful and specific in some of this stuff.
No, that's a great point. I think there was a general rule, like and we were chatting about this last night, how hindsight has been thrown out as a term that seems to be like, for some reason, it seems to be negative. But actually, I always think that actually some of the most important part of our learning curve can be from actually analyzing what other traders have said, their executions, what they've done, and actually how we can incorporate that strategy into our playbook.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like hindsight is only useless when there's no signal and efficacy in the statement. So if I roll a die and it ends up a 3 and I say, oh, I knew that was going to be a 3, there, like if I roll a die again and I say, oh, I think it's going to be a 2, like there's no real efficacy or signal in me trying to guess what the die is going to be, right? But if all of a sudden, like you have something where if I say, okay, this type of setup where you make it a large leg, you have this type of consolidation, and then you break out, this was a good pattern based on these variables. And then if you apply those variables and either through a back test or through a forward test, you find that there's actually signal. Well, the hindsight was actually extremely, extremely valuable, right? And so the question is, does that information have signal and will it be applicable and have efficacy going forward? If so, that's totally something you want. And so if you have a good, proven track record trader and they're saying, oh, setups A, B, and C were good and worth studying, guess what? That's like, yes, it's in hindsight, but that's still enormously advice worth heeding, right?
Yeah. I know I've always felt like that and that's how I developed a lot of my strategies was backtesting like Nate's comments and coming up with what he did. He'd share his executions and I'd be able to go, okay, that makes sense to me. I'm going to see how I can, incorporate that into my playbook.
Yeah, and it's so funny. If you take Qualamagi, if you take Greg Shabika, like all those top traders, I mean, really everything to some degree had to come from hindsight. And even for me, when I was developing my strategies, I was looking back to find, okay, let's study the best capitulations of the last 10 years, 20 years. Let's study the best breaking news headlines of the last 10, 20 years. And all of that is hindsight analysis, but you're still able to find the commonalities. And so that may or may not be useful. But if you take those commonalities and you start forward testing and the patterns hold, then all of a sudden you've got some real value there.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember Greg talking about it a couple of years ago at Traders for a Cause when he was trying to find, he was basically looking for ways of finding actually what was going to be the next big mover. And what he found from his back testing was actually, it was just, he found it easier just to wait for them to blow off. And then all of a sudden he'd have a short signal and that became his big setup that turned him into obviously the trader that he is today.
Yep. And it's so interesting because trading's amazing. There's just so many different ways to succeed. You could do mean reversion stuff. You could do with the trend. You have people like Chris Camillo that do like the kind of like the social arb. And so even with certain trends, you can say, using hindsight, what are the variables and the features that made a trend start? Like, okay, like something needs some level of virality. You need to be early enough where the stock hasn't, moved some crazy amount. You need to, I think some ideas are sexier than other ideas. Some markets are more willing to believe narratives than other markets, right? The last year in 2024 was a very strong bull market, and especially post the Trump trade and the Trump election, there was a lot of momentum. There was a lot of stocks moving. And so then we started to see the quantum chips and the quantum names started to really play out. And so guess what? AI was a hot theme where we saw the chip stocks make epic moves. Quantum is kind of a very similar narrative. We were in a very bullish market. A lot of these stocks had already started to make big legs and then were setting up. So you can even apply these concepts and hindsight analysis to defining and systemizing what makes a good trend, like what leads to some of these moves.
Yeah. And you shared something recently as well that, speaking of the quantum names, they obviously had like a bigger bounce back than expected, but then something simple like an entry signal of breaking the previous day lows, for example, and that would be your entry signal on something overextended. And I think that's important. I think that I have a really strong belief that anyone should be able to look at a chart, and you can. And if people want to describe it as hindsight, then I think that's their issue. But you should be able to go, that would have been my entry signal.
Yeah.
And it's also regardless of whether it worked or not. Like, okay, yeah, it did fade since then, but also that was my entry signal, right?
Yeah, and it's so funny, and I think that's like touching on the first of the 3 points as far as mentorship. So many people think there's value in ideas, and it's not that there isn't value in a trade idea, but I would say like having a trade idea is like 10% of the battle, maybe 5% of the battle. And I always laugh when people on Twitter will highlight a post, like unsolicited by the way, where it's like, oh look, I called this Palantir move, and it's them saying like, oh, you know, Palantir's gonna make another leg higher or something. Or I remember a Twitter debate where some person's like, oh, you know, oil's going below 60 or something. And it's like, look, like anybody can just throw shit at a wall and something's gonna stick, and you highlighting it in a tweet to me, I literally could not care less. Like anyone that does that, it's like, literally, am I not impressed? It is the least impressive thing I've ever seen, and I think it makes you seem as if you don't understand trading. Because so much more than that is, how did you actually execute it in a safe manner? What is the entry? What is the sizing? What are the exits? What's the stop loss? And so much of that, it's like, look, if you were actually making these great calls and those great calls mattered, well, most of those people on Twitter would have a lot more money than they actually do.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. I wanted to touch on, because I've always been so intrigued by the prop world, and I probably have this illusion that trading someone else's money is, I've only ever traded my own money, and I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people watching this. I've always had perhaps a false perception that makes it more difficult. So I just wanted to touch on that point, in particular, talking about, like you touched on, sizing up. And I know that's something that probably a lot of people will talk to you about on a random Saturday night or whenever it is. What would you say to people who perhaps thinking about sizing up? What are the barriers that they need to cross first? Because it's easy, obviously, like you're known as the exponential betting man as well. But it's very difficult for the average person perhaps to go, okay, I'm risking 1R. Okay, we've got an MSTR type setup, but whatever it is, I'm going to go 10R. Yeah. That's quite a big leap and a big jump.
If you're watching this, please do not start talking to me about this stuff on a Saturday night.
Sorry.
Unless it's a launch party. This is not the stuff I want to be talking about on a Saturday night at all. But for your answer, Sam, I do think there's an added layer of complexity when you're trading your own money, without a doubt. There's an added layer of risk. You would be foolish to not feel that way and to not factor that in. That being said, all the concepts do remain very much the same as far as growth and everything else. And I think especially on the retail side, when it's your own capital, you need to be so much more prudent and conservative with sizing up than you think. And that's where most people get in trouble. And actually one young trader we spoke with over the weekend, he's experiencing a large drawdown after a banner year last year. And he didn't have proper safeguards in place to know, when do I start to cut my risk? What are the loss limits that I really want to start to dial things down? And he didn't have it in place yet. And so often through that learning curve, it's never going to be a straight line up. Every learning curve is setbacks. And really what you're doing is you're kind of making higher lows and higher highs. And that's the journey climbing the mountain of the learning curve. And so if you know that there will be setbacks, you know that there will be all these issues, headaches and everything, most people are not conservative enough. That being said, most people also underestimate how much you can grow if you're just improving consistently. And so you never want to push so much that if the trade doesn't work out, you're, as I would call it, injured. Your psychology is shattered, your account is super impaired, and what you want to do is, if I were to take this loss, or if this were to go wrong, or if something really bad would happen, would that at all affect my long-term growth? You never want to risk impairing your long-term growth or the viability of your account. And so for some people, that might mean if you're trading 1,000 shares, That might mean just going to 1,100 shares for the next month. Then the month after that, going to 1,300 shares, then 1,500, then 2K, then 2,500. And now, obviously, we're changing the share size and positions for depending the trade, the liquidity, all that stuff. But in general, we want to be very gradually increasing our risk. And so exponential bet sizing, as you touched on, that's mostly for experienced traders, certainly elite traders. But what happens is early on, and this is where it's so important with the stages, early on, if you're brand new, you probably want to be risking $0. You just want to be in demo or trading one share and not even thinking about like the dollars, the risk, anything. You just want to be getting your reps, your way of the market. And soon after that, like again, share size probably just doesn't matter much. It's not about the P&L. You just want to be betting as small as possible until you have proven edge. Once you have proven edge, if you can start to differentiate between the quality of your setups, much like in poker where there's different quality hands, and 10-8 is not the same as aces or jacks or queens or kings. You want to start differentiating between your bets. And you don't need to do anything super crazy, but what happens is as you go from beginner, you might have just very uniform bet sizes and risk amounts, and that's fine. But as you go from beginner towards elite, you're going to, over time, adopt a more exponential bet sizing system. And so now think about it with the poker analogy. If you're a beginner just learning what hands win, how hands play out, should you really be worrying about, oh man, how much do I need to bet? No, it's too early on. You're just learning the hands, everything else. That being said, if you're always betting uniform, regardless of the quality of your hand, if you're betting the same amount on 10-8 as pocket aces, or whatever, most poker players, you're never going to be able to win. You're not going to be able to win in the long run because 95% of your hands are going to suck and 5% of your hands are going to be good, and you're going to make, $1 on the 5% of hands, but lose $1 each time on the 95% of hands, and the math doesn't work. And so what ends up happening is over time, betting more on the really good hands, like the aces, allows you to overcome all the times you need to fold the mediocre hands or just not be trading.
Yeah, no, great point. And I think poker is such an interesting comparison as well, because there's a few scenarios that can play out in terms of like, you think you could have a B grade setup, for example, which could be, let's say, pocket tens, but then you get flopped queen jack, for example. All of a sudden your B setup has dropped to a C or a D. And then equally, you've touched on as well all the time how sometimes you can have a B or a C grade setup, which could say, let's say, 10-8 suited, like you've just said, and then all of a sudden a 9 and a jack flops, and all of a sudden that setup suddenly elevated to perhaps A grade as well. So I suppose just touching on that.
So you're touching on what I consider one of the most important concepts and one of the, I guess, just underrated and under talked about concepts ever in trading. And that is the fact that expected value is dynamic. On the poker table, we can see that very clearly, right? You can start with even a shit hand, right? You can have like, I don't know, 7-10 suited, which isn't particularly great. But then if all of a sudden you get 8-9 jack suited, you could have a straight flush just like that. And a mediocre hand could become the nuts, right? And so that happens in trading, where every single bar that elapses, as time passes by, we need to be constantly estimating and handicapping our trades. And so there's times where something might look like an amazing setup. Wow, this stock panicked, you buy the right side of the V, then it should really be bouncing. But there's times where you might need to call an audible as it develops because it's not. Or there might be times where you think, oh man, I don't think this trade is so great. But then all of a sudden you get some really large buyer on the box and on the tape, and all of a sudden you're going with the trend with the really large buyer or something. Or a breaking news headline might erupt in the middle of a trade. And all of those variables are changing the expected value over time. How the play is unfolding, much like a poker hand, it's constantly changing. And in an ideal world, our position size, and whether we're even in the trade or not, adapts with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that people could tend to be quite poor at as well, in terms of adjusting as something. Because I've always said, like, each bar or each candle, each print is an extra piece of information. So something can change within 5 minutes. You've had 5 minutes of information, and all of a sudden you think you've got like pocket aces, but then what you realize is actually you've got deuce 7. And I think that's the beauty though of trading, is that you've constantly got that picture evolving, you've constantly got new information coming in.
Well, and here's the thing. Most people get just so biased and fall in love with, ooh, I think this trade setup is so good. So they might, like, you can start with a good poker hand, then after the flop, it can be total shit. And every poker player knows, I got to fold this for the most part, right? But with trading, like, the psychology on a lot of areas is very magnified. And so it's so hard sometimes to say, oh, wait, this had the potential to be a good play, but now it sucks. It's not what I thought it was. And over time, you start to recognize that and then respond more accurately. And there's times where you think a play is decent and all of a sudden it's working really, really well. And most people, they're so slow to take their losses because they're emotionally wedded to this. And then they're so quick when plays are really working well and things are like one of my top heuristics that I talk about in the course is your best trades immediately go in your favor. And the best trades that start working the easiest, the most, and it's just going, like it's just going through it like butter. Like, that's the type of thing where so many people scalp out their size so quick and then they end up with nothing and it just keeps going. And then when it's struggling, it's not working, that's where they have more time to buy more, they're fighting with it, they're churning it, and it's like, okay, on the play that you should have either been cutting or not adding more and not fighting with it, you're so biased and wed to it that you're fighting it. Then the ones that do go in your favor, you're cutting quick. Yeah. And it's the exact opposite. And we need, as traders, to reprogram those habits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've spoken about this as well, because me and Stan at IU, we always say, when, particularly if we're looking to fade something, the best ones don't bounce. So sometimes, like, if your entry signal is, oh, I'm going to wait for a bounce, it will never be that A grade setup, because the ones that bounce are also the ones that can reclaim, whereas the ones that don't bounce are just going to fade. So I think that's such like a great piece of advice, and it just reminds me of the joke as well when you're talking about bar closing, and the only time you wait for the bar to close as well.
Yep. Yeah. And so much of what I try to teach, and I think anyone really needs, is just a framework for how to view price action. And so to your point, if something makes a big leg and it can't bounce, is that bullish or bearish? That's bearish. But so many people, their position size and how they trade it doesn't really reflect that, right? Mm-hmm. So then if you get something that can't bounce, and you're just rolling or making consecutive lower highs, that's something that might set up for continuation lower. Mm-hmm. But so many people are fighting that. Then if you get something that actually is, bouncing really well, I want to be more long biased to the stuff that's bouncing well and surprising me, and more short biased towards the stuff that can't bounce at all and is consolidating. Yeah,
no, absolutely. That's such a great point. Something else I wanted to touch on today was a long-term mindset. So I'd like to think, and I know that everyone here, for example, watching us is going to be extremely committed, but there are going to be periods where perhaps it's difficult to be as committed on a day-to-day basis. What are some of the tips and tricks that you've done throughout, like this, you're talking about a decade career here. How have you avoided, stagnation at certain points of that?
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, we're human and life happens, right? There's going to be sickness. There's going to be external struggles. Everyone is human and dealing with stuff. And so first of all, I think being a little lenient as far as forgiveness on yourself. Like, look, take that vacation, deal with the life situations that happen. But like 95% of the time, you want to be locked in with intention and a sense of urgency, trying to get better every single day. And a lot of what I recommend is, how can you find the most effective daily routine that's going to get you that little bit better? And then how can you even have a pared down routine that's like, okay, look, I'm feeling burnt out, I'm a little bit sick, I've got a lot going on in my life. I'm still going to make sure I hit the daily report card. I'm still going to make sure I do a detailed trade write-up. So I think for so many people, it's like, if you internalize an obsession with the process, and if you're playing the long game, you recognize, like, look, if I miss one day, it's not going to kill me. But the most important thing is that I always, keep the routine consistently over time. It's much like the gym. Like stuff's going to happen. You're going to miss a workout. But are you over months, years, continually to just progress?
Yeah, and I think that's, just like the 80-20 rule in terms of you can miss, like took in the gym, you can miss one session. The issue that most people do though is one session leads to another, then it leads to, I'll start again on Monday.
Yeah.
And then they don't start Monday. And then it leads to, I'll start again in January.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you've lost, 3-4 months, which is pivotal to any sort of development.
Yep. And I think for that reason, because then missing one is fine. Missing two, all of a sudden, you're breaking your positive habits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with anything, I always try to tell myself, like, okay, look, we're human. One is allowed. And look, of course, if crazy life circumstances, just take care of yourself, right? But if we're talking about the more just everyday stuff, okay, look, you can get a little messy with your eating on one meal, or you can miss a workout one time, but just don't let the second one happen, and just keep that chain alive and sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get back on track, I think, as quickly as possible. And I'm keen to know as well, speaking of like a long-term career, what's one aspect of trading that you think isn't spoken about enough? Whether that's positive or negative, just one aspect that you think no one talks about. Because I think no one, for me, not enough people talk about how frustrating it can be in terms of even sometimes your good days aren't good enough and your bad days are bad. And I don't know if that's sort of commonly spoken about, for me anyway, at least.
Well, and trading is very, very tough psychologically, without a doubt. And again, we live in a world that's very social media driven, and nobody wants to advertise, man, like I'm so frustrated, I'm sucking wind, I'm in a drawdown, I'm losing a bunch, or man, I totally botched this, or this trade. It's the same reason where, like, if you're having a bad day and you're ready to punch a hole through your wall, nobody's like, oh, tee-hee on Instagram, look at this hole I punched because I'm having such a shitty day. Yeah. Nobody's like, oh man, I'm so pissed off, because that's just not what the cultural norms are, right? And I don't think a lot of this stuff is necessarily malicious or intentional. It's just how psychology works. Mm-hmm. You always want to put your best front forward to other people and out in the world. And so I think on social, you're just not seeing a lot of it. But yes, everybody feels that. And that's one of the hardest things about trading is I've worked with so many traders where they've had amazing years, they've had amazing growth, but then they don't allow themselves to celebrate and enjoy it and cherish the moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's necessarily optimal for growth, but I also just don't think it's so optimal for life. And I think I was definitely super, super hard on myself when I was going forward in my 20s. And I think as you get older and you've done more years under your belt, you develop more perspective. And I don't know if I want to call it wisdom, but it's just you've been there and you realize. And so every drawdown I would get in, I would be so frustrated. It would be so heartbreaking. But then after enough years, I was like, Lance, you've been through this. How many, if this is part of the job, if all the psychology, the drawdowns, the losses, the frustration, if it's part of the job, do I want to really let this constantly ruin my life? If you're going to be negative 40% of days, do I really want to be unhappy on 40% of trading days? What kind of life is that to live? And ultimately, as traders, it's an amazing job. It can give us so much, but you don't want that to come at the cost of happiness. And so many traders allow that to happen by being kind of just too tough on themselves, not celebrating the moment. And it's okay to want to push and want to grow. And as I always recommend, there's a great book, The Gap and the Gain. Mm-hmm. The gap is when you're always saying, oh man, I could have been further. Oh man, I'm missing this. Someone did better, whatever. And the gain is looking back and saying, wow, look at the progress I've made. And traders especially, but probably all humans, they spend way too much time looking at the gap rather than feeling good about the gain.
Yeah, and that book's really helped me reflect as well. Particularly we went and played golf yesterday, and I reflect on how, as an example, once upon a time I was happy breaking 100. Now I'm, and it's almost now sometimes I get frustrated when I'm not in the low 80s, but I'm actually look where I've come in such a short space of time. And that for me is always like a reminder that I should be celebrating actually how far we've come. And I think that's probably the same for everyone.
Well, a lot of our human psychology, I would argue to some degree, is broken. Like, our human psychology, in my belief, exists for evolutionary purposes.
Yeah, yeah.
Our psychology has been honed over thousands of years to make sure that we stash resources, to make sure that we're always pushing for more, and that we're ensuring the longevity of our, I guess, species and our gene line and everything, right? It's not optimizing for, hey, I want to be happy and pleased with myself, right?
Yeah,
And so often we can grow and we can do this, and it's our hedonic little set point adjusts. You can go from making 50K to 100K, 100K to 200K, and trust me, 6 months later, you know, it's just your new normal. And you could go from this house to that house, this car to that car. It's just going to become your new normal. And that's great for having the human just species push. But it's not great if you want to feel good about yourself and proud and accomplished and happy.
Absolutely.
And so it's so important to, I guess, be aware of some of these psychological breakpoints where it's like, wait, like I'm engineered to focus too much on the gap rather than the gain.
Yeah.
I'm engineered too much to focus on everybody's wins. I'm engineered too much to like focus on P&L as a scorecard and all these external quantitative measures that don't matter, right? And like, I think traders forget that the point of money and P&L is to live a happy, fulfilled, pleasurable life. The point of life is not to maximize and optimize P&L and money. P&L and money can be a means to all of that. But again, P&L happens to just be a very convenient scorecard and a very also visible one. I can tell you there are a lot of very rich traders that are very, very, very unhappy, and you'll never see it.
Yeah, quite. You said you wasn't sure if it was wisdom. It most definitely sounds like wisdom. Now, it would be remiss of me. Obviously, Magnum Opus is extremely exciting. I can't wait for there to be more content. I'm interested to know, though, like in terms of if there was one big goal that someone signing up to Magnum Opus, what would you like that, their main takeaway to be?
If those had signed up for Magnum Opus, and so first of all, there's a 100% free tier. So look, whether you want all the content, some of it, there's no reason not to check it out because I'm convinced no matter your style, your product, you're going to learn a little something.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would want that person to take away is there's a lot of ways to win at this game. No one way or strategy or style is right. And I don't purport to have any, insight that's greater than anyone else's where what I do is best and everyone else is wrong. But I think the more important part is learning the concepts that lead to success. How do I need to think about expected value? How do I need to think about finding edge? How do I need to think about the learning process and how to improve as efficient and effectively as possible? I think all of those things are the real important takeaways. And just to see a lens for how someone that's really good and achieved a high level of performance at trading, arguably, one of the best out there, did it, and how I see the world, and it allows you to refine your own lens. So what's been so cool is there's so many traders that trade stuff that I have zero interest in, or I'm just not aware of, or I'm not watching, and they've incorporated it into their own strategies. There's traders that do swing trading, that do long-term trading, that do crypto trading, that have taken a lot of my concepts and applied it and made it their own. And that's how it should be. Because, there's one land speed. We don't need 50 land speeds or 500 or 5,000. And the course isn't really about, and there's like, if you're just looking for, oh, hey, live trading, piggyback my trades, price alert so everyone can hop in. It's like, I have literally zero interest in that. I have zero interest in people just following my coattails and me front running all the people that follow me. And I think that's becoming a common trend for people to monetize. But like, I don't even find it ethical, number one. But number two, that doesn't help your audience, right? That doesn't help them learn. That doesn't help them improve and find their path. And so for me, what I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to just simply provide the education and the knowledge for people to find their own path and become their own best trader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly say that if we did have 50 Lance Bs, we need a lot more restaurants in the world. That's for sure.
A lot more restaurants and a lot more liquidity in markets we would need.
A lot more cows for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to like point one that you made at the beginning as well, that people aren't perhaps aware of the learning curve, and obviously everyone wants a shortcut. And that is it's an attractive shortcut if someone says, look, you can make X with following me or whatever.
Well, yeah, I find it so funny too, because so many people are like, oh, Lance, like, like why don't you do live alerts? I want to follow your, it's like, dude, I see what, like, don't bullshit me. The reason why you want that is so you can piggyback and make money off of my trading and everything. Yeah. And it's like, that's not really how you succeed in life. It's like, that's not really how you beat the game.
Yeah.
And that's not really something I've any interest in, right?
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable either, because then, like, okay, what if it's like, Lance doesn't show up to the market today? What if Lance doesn't show up? What if Lance is just done overall and I don't trade anymore? What do? You don't have a living anymore? So it's like, it's not sustainable, and it's not really how you succeed at this job. Like so this would happen, right? And with mentorship, it's okay to study someone and what they do and to kind of learn and apply their concepts. And especially at Trillium or anywhere, like, you have very close mentorship, and it's okay for there to be monkey see, monkey do, right? You need that in the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. If you're studying a basketball player or an athlete, it's totally fine to kind of copy the good things they do and learn from it. But ultimately, though, nobody can press those buttons for you. And so if I'm sitting there just trying to like piggyback, I'm not able to make those decisions in real time. So then I don't know, like, you're not getting better, and it's not sustainable, and it's not really going to help you find your path.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so well said. And obviously, you do touch on sort of your career, how much money you've made, etc. You certainly don't need to be making Magnum Opus. You are doing it for other reasons. I just wondered if you could perhaps, chat a little bit about why.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I've realized that my main motivation for the course is because I hate myself and I like suffering and I hate relaxation. I hate daiquiris on the beach. I hate good quality sleep. I hate doing things fun and seeing daylight. I love being trolled by the internet. Like, for me, I suspect most of, I think I'm in extra innings at this point for my trading career, which I thought was going to be over probably, 3 years ago. And for me, it was one of those things where it's like, I didn't know what the next step was going to be for me in my life and what the next chapter held. And I just started, tweeting. And actually, Nate, thank you, Nate. Nate was one of the first people to kind of broadcast some of the high quality content I was putting out there and amplify it to the masses. And it ended up being cool. Like, it was helping people. And then, right, I did the Patreon. And so I was doing a Patreon where it was 100% transparently, all proceeds were going to charity. I was matching all proceeds, and it started to raise like a fair amount of money and do a lot of good in the world. And so then for me, it was like, Lance, like, before you kind of put this chapter behind you, like, let's get all that knowledge out there and create the most beautiful, comprehensive course ever made. And let's give this to the masses. Let's try and help tens of thousands of people. Let's monetize part of it so we can just give back and create this perpetuity of money for charity. And I think ultimately, it was still just something for me, because I wanted to just bookend a lot of my career with that and have that information out there in like the most beautiful, created way ever. So a lot of it was just a passion project, and then knowing, hey, this is going to help a lot of people and hopefully put a lot of just bullshit gurus spreading misinformation out of business.
Yeah, it's absolutely a testament to you as well. And I could see, like, through your career how devoted you've been, because just the high level of quality, like even down to, I've noticed as well, you have an outfit change for every video, for example. I'm thinking you must have had a massive wardrobe, but you've devoted so much to this course already to make it the the best you could possibly do. And I think that's
Yeah.
just a testament to you as an individual. I think it's also easy for us to see, like watching it as well, why you've been so successful as well. Like if that's the endeavor that you put into all aspects of anything that you're passionate about, well, it's like no wonder, right?
Well, that's my fatal flaw, I think, is because it would have been so easy to half-ass it, but it wouldn't have been right for me or for anyone. And I just, if I was going to do it, it was like, okay, I am going to go 110%.
Yeah.
And we are going to hit all the topics. We're going to make this look as good as possible. We're going to make this as clear, concise, digestible as possible. And there's a lot more coming. And I think feedback's been great, and there's only better stuff ahead.
Yeah, feedback's been, well, I mean, Saturday night, we obviously had the launch party. It was great. And it's also what a great bunch of people as well, like who came to that.
Oh yeah, the other, well, and that's the real beauty of some of this. And again, if I want to hate more on social media and the internet, on the internet, a lot of just the trolls and the divisiveness is amplified. And once you go in person, it's like, what do you know? Like, hey, look, I might not be Sam's size, but nobody's saying these, mean troll comments to my face, right?
Yeah,
Everybody in person is like, wow, like, thank you. Like, this has meant a lot to me. This has helped me have a better career. This has helped me earn more for my family. This has helped me have a livelihood I otherwise wouldn't have had. And so the in-person stuff is where you really say, like, wow. I mean, there were people there from all over the world at that launch party, and you realize, like, hey, I dedicated, over a year of my life to make this course, and there's going to just be thousands of people from all over the world that are a little bit better off. And the other thing too is I do this to really model that hey, everyone, like, trading's great, like, money's great, stressing less and having freedom is all great, but ultimately the real happiness, it's not in the green Lambo. It's in finding fulfillment, being proud of what you've done, and then helping others also be well off. And whether it's through volunteering, whether it's through donations, whether it's through wisdom or just helping others, help yourself first, help your family, help your friends, but then try and help the world. And this is my attempt to kind of do all of it in a passion project that's fun for me.
Yeah, and I can attest, it is certainly helping. And it's great, like I said, it's great to see that passion. It's true. It is genuinely, truly inspiring. So, thank you so much for sharing it. And then lastly, what's next? What's next for Lance?
Well, I think right now the top priority is to take an actual break for a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, Sam, but this will be my last podcast recording for probably a very, very long time.
I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Okay, look, unless it's Joe Rogan, no offense, Sam, but like,
I understand. Yeah.
Look, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman,
Huberman, he'd be good.
Huberman, yeah,
you might not be
good
quite
old
his thing,
Hubes.
but yeah.
Yeah, Hubes, if you're out there listening, like, I'll get on your podcast. Atia, fine, you too, Atia. Outside of that, which obviously they're not going to be contacting me, I'm taking a little break. And the coolest thing is, like, the world is so big out there, and I love health, I love longevity, I love fitness, I love markets, I love helping others. And so, I don't know, it's going to be nice to kind of just reflect on and find the right balance for all these things. I'm always going to be adding more content to the course. I'm always going to be growing that. I'm always going to inevitably be watching markets and trading. And you know me, I can't resist a big op. But I think the nice part about life is I've got some skill sets now. I've got some reach, and I've got a lot of ideas and thought and time to just say, hey, what's going to have just the greatest impact for me and the world ahead.
Absolutely. And I'm truly honored. So thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege this is going to be your last podcast for a while. Obviously, if someone like Huberman or Rogan does come, I completely understand. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for inviting me to Miami to record this. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, it's so nice getting into just to enjoy some sun for a few days as well. So thank you so much, and thank you for the course.
Thank you,
I can't
Sam.
wait for that more content to come out.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate the friendship, the good times, and thank you to Nate and Investors Underground for having me. And looking forward to more great things for the community.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of Trading Takes. Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please check out some of others with some great traders. Thank you for watching.